Audio is on.
I think they
You guys didn't miss anything. We didn't start yet.
Can you hear us, Linda and Karen? Okay, great. All right, everyone. How are we doing today?
All right.
Everyone have a good weekend?
Yeah.
Mondays, case of the Mondays, and I haven't.
Okay, so 13th week.
Yeah, can you believe it? It's the 12th week. We're officially halfway. We're over the hump. Can you believe it?
No.
It's like it's kind of like it's crazy. I just was looking today. I'm like, oh my goodness, where's the time gone? So halfway there, it's gonna keep pushing to the end. So you're starting to feel, like things getting a little, crazy, a little ramping up. They're gonna keep doing that. So just make sure to keep on top. Feel free to hit up instructors, TAs, get together on the weekends, all that good stuff. Our instructors, everyone here in this program is here to support you. So it's gonna get tough, especially kicking off this module here. So reach out for help when you need it.
That's always encouraging.
Don't worry. We're doing a week of
Yeah,
easy
yeah.
and then sending you over to Gus, and Gus will do all the hard stuff, and then you'll get me back for 2 weeks, and then we'll go from there.
All right.
Cool.
Poor Gus, he had to introduce us to JavaScript and now.
I'm literally doing all the easy stuff and then being like, all right, Gus, you take it from here.
Cool, but I just have a quick announcements here. Should only take like a minute. So as Max just said here, Max and Gus are sort of teaching modules 6, 7, and 8. So the content itself hasn't changed, but the order has just very slightly. So I just want to give you a quick rundown. I'll also be posting this in the classroom under announcements and Slack. So week 13 this week here, you'll have Max for server-side JavaScript and Node.js introduction. Then the next 2 weeks, weeks 14 and 15, you'll have Gus for the intro to databases and data modeling. Then 16 and 17, 2 weeks, Max will be rejoining to do a dive back in Node.js. And then Gus will ultimately wrap it up with week 18 with DevOps deployment infrastructure. So changed a little bit, but the content has stayed the same. Just the order has changed a little bit here. I don't have any questions just on the week rundown. The module changed just a little bit. Any questions? We just think it'd make more sense for, yes.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, so weeks 13 this week will be server-side JavaScript, Node.js. Then next week and the following, so weeks 14 and 15, will be intro to databases and data modeling with Gus. And then Max will be rejoining for weeks 16 and 17, back into Node.js and server-side JavaScript, and then Gus will wrap up for week 18. So you can feel free to talk a little bit about why you made the decision here. Just, but it's ultimately to make your lives easier, trust me. So Max will talk about that in just a minute.
Yep.
And then we're also fortunate to have 2 teaching assistants joining us. So the first one is Alice Miller, who some of you may recognize from Hack Upstate as a sponsor. And Drew Knob will also be joining us, I think in 3 weeks or so here. So I know many of you know Max here, so I won't have him give an intro. But Alice, if you'd like to say a few words on who you are, what you do, all that good stuff for those folks that may not know.
Yeah, sure. I'm Alice. I'm a principal software developer at Computer Software on Utica. Been programming for about 6 years now, with a main focus on full stack web development. So pretty familiar with this. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask me.
Awesome. Thank you, Alice. Appreciate it. Alice also coming all the way from Utica. So really appreciate it. Thank you, Alice. All right, that's all I have. Any questions for me? Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Max. Anything at all? Cool. All right, everyone. Well, Max, I'll hand it over to you.
Cool. Thank you, guys. So a little background on the schedule and why we decided to change it up. So initially, we were going to do 3 weeks of Node.js, right, which is server-side JavaScript. And then Gus was going to come in and do 2 weeks of data modeling. And while that's good and the content's important to cover, Node.js is primarily used for making backends and APIs. And APIs, 9 times out of 10, have a database involved with them, right? They get some information in about the user, they want to save it somewhere, and then there are also other endpoints for getting that data and pulling it out of the database. So it would be very hard to dive into all the complexities of server-side JavaScript without having the database piece covered, right? But the reverse for that is also true. So if you start with just databases and working with databases, you're like, this is great, but what's the practical use for them? I don't know how to use this database, when to use it, that kind of thing. So Gus and I are intermixing. I'm doing the first week. I mean, I'm hoping to slow it down a little bit, do the very basics of Node, and have you guys really hungering for like, okay, but what are the practical applications of this? How do we really use Node? And then dive into the databases with Gus. I get you guys back for 2 weeks, and then we start getting into actually full stack projects and getting a front end up, getting things saving in the database, doing multi-user applications, diving into frameworks like Meteor and Sales. All of that is the 2 weeks when I come back. After that, I go, okay, this is fun, but I'm done with you guys, and you go back to Gus. And then Gus will do all the infrastructure, all the deployment, this is great, and I see it working here, but how do I get it on the internet? How do I get customers using it? After we get to that point, we are really close to the end of the program. So I believe you go over to Jake, and Jake does testing with you guys for 2 weeks. And you learn all about like, all right, I think I made this, but how do we make sure this is all working? You come back to me for one final week, which is going to be security. And we're going to talk about a little bit more than just security, because security for developers is kind of tough to cover for an entire week. So we're going to do basics like password hashing and algorithms and HTTPS and SSL certificates and all that kind of fun stuff. We're going to slip in a couple things like DNS, which is one of those things. DNS is how you wire up your website together, and how you say, all right, I bought my domain name here, and I have my web hosting here, and I have my email over here. How do I get all three of them to talk together? DNS is one of those things where shouldn't be complicated, and there are only a couple acronyms that go with it, and you go, okay, but I don't get it. They're just telling me follow this step, and I did, and it works, but no one ever explains it. No one ever tells you, okay, this is what an A record is. This is what an NS record is. This is what, so we're gonna slip that in. And then your final 2 weeks of instruction is back with Joey, and Joey's gonna teach you React. And the fun part about React is it's really going to be a great culmination to pull everything that you've learned over the whole program, and connect it all together and go, I can make something full stack. I have my database, I have Node, I have my front end skills, I have the information showing up in React, and it really kind of just pulls the whole program together. So if you thought the first 3 months went fast, wait until the second half, because things are going to start clicking. And it's really about the puzzle pieces are just going to start coming together now, right? Before it was, all right, here's a little JavaScript, and here's a little front end, and here's a little, right, all over the place. Now all of a sudden you're going to start seeing, this first week of Node connect in with a week of, or 2 weeks of Gus with the databases. And then you'll see that connect in with Joey with the React. And then you'll see that tie into all the front end stuff. And all of a sudden it's just going to be like, whoa. That's it. But now we're going to start with Node. I kind of just did a brain dump earlier today of, okay, let's figure out what we need to cover on Node. I initially taught this content as a 3-hour workshop. What I'm thinking about doing is splitting this into 2 different sections. And I want to leave you guys at least a half hour at the end of class just to kind of play around with Node while we're still here and you can ask questions. So what we're going to do is do a basic covering of Node. We are going to dive into Express a little bit, which is a framework most commonly used with Node. We're going to create a couple of our own API endpoints. So instead of the New York Times, right, where the New York Times had that endpoint for you and you got the data from them, instead, we're going to build our own endpoints right now. So we're going to build a simple calculator that just adds 2 numbers. But we're going to kind of see where that is, and we're going to start looking at that and going, hey, that looks familiar. I could do that on the front end too. And that's the magic of JavaScript, so you can do it on both. And then we are going to do a couple things like serving a file on the front end, and then figure out where to go from there. So don't get overwhelmed. It's going to seem pretty basic. The main thing to remember is where we use Node, right? Node isn't used in the browser. Node isn't used in Chrome. Node is server side, right? Or at least the aspects of it that we are teaching. There are plenty of other places you can use Node. But when you hear Node.js at a job description or someone talking about it off the cuff, 9 times out of 10, it is run on the server. Well, we'll get into that in a second. So any questions before I dive in? Yes.
Are you sharing your slides?
I'm sharing it in Zoom. Do you want the Google Slide link as well?
Yes, please. I'm not watching.
No problem. Okay, so these slides were adapted for the workshop, so I may skip over a couple things, but let's dive in. So you will commonly hear people say Node instead of Node.js. It means the same thing. Angular has this whole complicated naming scheme that goes with it. So Angular got started and it was like AngularJS, and AngularJS was version 1, and then they did Angular v2. And it's like this great sin if you say Angular v2 or AngularJS v2, they're like, no, it's just Angular v2, or I don't know, it gets complicated. Anyway, Node and Node.js are the same thing. It is a platform for building apps, typically used for building out your own APIs. What makes it so special is it's really designed to be fast for input and output, right? So a lot of other programs are great for being these huge programs that have all these bells and whistles built into it, and Node was really built to be lightweight. It runs off V8. V8 is kind of the engine under the hood. V8 is also what powers JavaScript and Chrome. So the same thing that is taking your JavaScript and optimizing it and running it at the machine level is the same thing that's running JavaScript and Chrome, which is kind of cool. V8 is also the engine that is used in Electron, which powers Atom and Visual Studio Code. So it's kind of used everywhere, and it's all open source, which is why so many people use it. Node only came out in 2009, so I guess it's celebrating its 10th anniversary. As programming languages go, or server-side languages go, that's relatively new. Things like Java and Python and all that have been around for years. And it's also supported by Google, IBM, and Microsoft. So a lot of big companies are using this. NASDAQ just announced maybe 2 or 3 years ago that they're rewriting their entire trading platform in Node, just because they can't get the speed of Node from anywhere else. So yeah. Lots of cool things going on with Node. So, like I said 4 times already, primarily made for making APIs. Python, Ruby, Java, PHP, let's throw it way back to, I think, my second day teaching, right? Those are all things, all other programming languages that are traditionally used server-side. And that's super important to know, right? Is when you go in and you go, oh, well, I know Node, and the person kind of looks at you and you're like, oh, that would be similar to Python, PHP, Ruby, any of those. You may have heard of Django, Ruby on Rails, Grails, Cake, PHP, Laravel. Those are all frameworks. So those all go into their equivalent in the Node world would be Express, Meteor, or Sales.js are the 3 popular Node frameworks. We're going to be diving into Express this week because it's the most basic and the easiest to use. And then once you guys get back from Gus, we're going to dive into Meteor and Sales and all the magic. Yes.
So you're saying there's Node.js and that's different than a Node framework?
So Node.js is to Express as Python is to Django, or Ruby is to Ruby on Rails. So Node is the base, is the foundation. And then there are frameworks that are built on top of that. So the best example of that would be, you guys have been programming in JavaScript on the front end, but you use jQuery on top of that. Or even React, right? React is built in JavaScript. Yeah. Okay. So the important thing to keep in mind in all of this is, like, why are we learning this, right? Like, we just did JavaScript. I'm just getting comfortable with it. Why do I need to know yet another thing? And the reason it's important is because JavaScript runs great in the browser, but people found out it also runs great in the server. And why do we need a server? The reason we need a server is the internet, right? We want multiple users to be able to use our application. So instead of one user here just running their the JavaScript in their browser and being happy, they want to all communicate with each other, right? But that's not really possible. You really need a centralized information source in the middle of it. So when I got started doing application development, I went out and I actually learned how to make a website. I'm like, all right, this is great. Then I went out and I'm like, I know I need a database. Like that just makes sense. So I went out and I learned how to use a database, and popular databases are SQL and Mongo, and Gus will be covering them both next week. Now I'm like, great. I got the data sitting here and I got the user information here. How do they connect to the database? And the answer is they can't. The reason for that is their security, right? You don't want your regular user to be able to connect right into your database, because they would be able to see every piece of user's information and be able to edit it. So what we do is we put an app server or a back-end server in front of our database, right? And these two together make up our application, the back-end app server and the database server as well. And these two connect to each other fine, right? Both of these traditionally are running in some kind of data center. And then what happens is all of your end users go to your website or go to your app or whatever it may be and talk to your app server over an API. That API is going to be able to go back and forth with your database, pull the information, update the information, do whatever it needs, and then send that information back down to the user. So this week, we're going to forget about the database. That will be covered next week. This week, we're going to focus on getting this set up, getting multi-user connections working. We're going to dive back into Postman, which I know you guys have a little experience with. And we're just going to get Node running on our computer. How are we feeling in the terminal? Pretty good? Might do like a 15-minute refresher tomorrow on just a reminder. Here's what a dot does. Here's what a CD is. Here's, all of that basic information. I feel like the terminal is one of those things where you can't really like sit down and learn the terminal, right? Like you just use the terminal and you pick up commands as you go. I fought it pretty hard for a while when I was getting started, and then over time I kind of warmed up to it and I went, oh, okay, this isn't too bad. But we will see where you guys are at after today and go from there. Questions? Cool. Okay, so NPM, have we covered NPM yet?
I don't think so. But
Somebody did.
We didn't cover it.
Okay.
I think we mentioned it.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe that was.
You may have gotten it.
NPM was like sick, and then there was a whole bunch of things that were connected to it, and those got sick too.
Yes. So Jake may have covered it a little bit with require and import and all of that stuff. We're going to be using that syntax right in Node. We're going to be using require. And basically what a package is think of it like jQuery. Think of it like React. Think of it. It is just a bundle of code that someone has released for you, and sometimes those bundles have other dependencies in them, which cause cascading failures.
It's just like a big function.
It is like a function built with 4 other functions that you can use. Yes.
Okay.
And that's exactly what it is. It is a package, and the package tends to be a list of functions. Most times there is documentation with that package. And that package saves you time because you don't have to write the code yourself, right? So an example of a common package might be jQuery, right? So instead of having to write all of those functions in .click and on event listener and all of that stuff, you can go right in with your jQuery and do .html and update the interface. So Node NPM works both on the front end and the back end. So it is important to pay attention to what the package is for, because you may be getting a package for something that's designed to work on the front end, and then you try and make it work on the back end. But we're going to dive into 2 different packages today. One of them is Express, which is that server framework that runs on top of Node. And the other one is called Body Parser, but we'll get to that in a second. Also important to know what some other package managers are. You may have heard of pip for Python, pip, gems for Ruby, or composer for PHP. Those tend to be the more program-related ones. Can any of you think of the name of the one that runs on your Mac that I think you guys have installed? Homebrew. So Homebrew is another example of a package manager. Those packages just happen to be for your Mac.
So NPM is the same thing as Homebrew?
Except Homebrew is for your Mac and NPM is for Node.
Okay.
Or any other JavaScript related projects.
Okay.
Used to be just for Node. NPM stands for Node Package Manager, but it has branched out over the years and kind of become the de facto source of all JavaScript packages. Okay, so the good news is that this slide was for the workshop, and you guys already have Node installed, so we get to save a lot of this time. So what we're going to do is use a coding environment called Cloud9. Cloud9 was an independent company that was bought out by AWS. AWS is Amazon Web Services. AWS is the largest web host in the world, the largest privately available web host. So if you don't, Google is technically the largest, but if you don't count Google's traffic, AWS is the largest.
When you say web host, what do you mean?
Data center, server, network data, storage, backend servers, databases, that's all your web host. So I sent out a Slack link to this Cloud9 instance. Never used this collaboratively before. The reason why I picked this instead of REPL was I know there were some connection issues with REPL. AWS has arguably the best infrastructure in the world, so I'm hoping that this environment works a little bit better. I did peek in on you guys when Jake was teaching, and I really liked that collaborative coding environment that he had going on. And so I would like to replicate that. The only downside to using Cloud9 is that it does require an AWS account, which is free and you don't need a credit card or any of that stuff.
Yeah, it asks for a credit card.
Said it wouldn't charge you unless you went over the free tier.
Not saying that out loud, and I'm not on camera, but I was afraid of that.
Is there a frozen code?
Credit card.
Well, let's try something. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second, and we're going to try and create an account on my AWS.
Invent a credit card number.
Hold on, give me a second.
We need to write
Um,
We gotta use our hacker skills. So bad, I'm not trying to.
if you can hack AWS, you will not be in jail. They will hire you immediately, let me tell you. Let's do this. Let's add them to that. Well, where's the?
The best shape of my life. let me tell you. What did you do today? 500 push-ups. Why? Because that's all I can do. I wanna go to that like Martha Stewart jail. That's all.
They do have a UWS free here. But
Yeah, there's like a.
It's free, but they still require the credit card.
it's pretty much to make sure that you get paid. Anytime you sign for anything free.
All right, let's try this. We might be hacking the system a little bit, but we're gonna try and sign in with CIC student, and the password is the text in the red. It's CIC student !1 with a capital C, and capital S. But yes, it is in Slack. And the link that you are signing in is right, I sent it at 5:36. I'm actually gonna try and do that myself and see what happens.
What is the difference?
Oh, the account ID is probably MZM Tech, but let me see. Sorry about this. I did test this earlier. I just didn't get to the credit card step. Damn it. Well, maybe this is.
Wait, did you put, that thing's the password, the CIC thing?
Yeah, but I have to get the account ID.
Or account alias?
Let's see if this works. That's clearly my account ID. Crap. Users, CIC students.
I'm just giving up. I don't even try anymore. That's how I get to give them. Sometimes I'm like, how do I do that? Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yes. She may have sent that today. Yeah, I don't know if she might, but I did confirm she was in the thing.
Oh, really? To work in like different one here.
That's how my daughter's hair is.
How is that?
I told her that's what I got.
Enter your account ID or alias. Okay, well, that's this. And that's that's that. All right, well, we might be going back to old school. We could try REPL again. Thoughts on REPL?
Try
It works.
That's not the resounding, yeah, man, let's do REPL that I was looking for.
Sometimes it works for me, but then after a while it got kicked out. I don't know why.
Oh, you know what, maybe,
Sometimes it didn't, sometimes it didn't.
hey, okay, hold on, maybe this is gonna work. So that is going to be the username is that, the password is that, and the account ID is that. And I'm sure someone who uses AWS is going to see that I posted that information and scream bloody murder, but I don't use it, so let's see. So when you hit that that US East 2 link, the first field that it asks for, you put in the account ID
Instead of an email address?
instead of an email
Oh,
address.
wait, enter your account.
I'm not authorized to open this environment. So what's the account?
I put it in Slack. Okay, so if I sign back in as me, will it let me?
Oops. Yeah, I got a 400.
We
A
like
big old fat
400.
400, like a really large, look at this. It's a massive 400 in my face.
All right, let me see. We're making progress. Hold on. We just have to get the.
But he needs to go home. Very inappropriate
AWS.
today. Not laughing.
I can probably go here and open this and then share with CIC student. Yeah, sure. All right, someone try the link again after you've signed in and see if you can get in.
Oh, I think I'm in.
It says press CMD.
Yep.
Do you have an ad blocker installed? Maybe Brave?
Yeah.
Can you either
I'm
get
in.
or whitelist Amazon
Okay.
or AWS.Amazon, maybe?
I'm in.
Okay. Anyone not in? Okay.
Got it. Woo! Great step. Session expired.
Yes, and then the password. Come on, baby. How long has it been on that screen? Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah. Yes, you got it. I don't know how to do that, but we'll figure it out. It should just be like right click and then like add to trusted sites or something like that. I would go to my account and sign out in the top right. No, it's normally.
If you go to Android,
Yeah. Okay, and now do the account ID. That's that one.
Is that what you're trying to get to?
Yep, you're in. You're good. How we doing? Good? Okay. If the brave users have are still stuck in 3 minutes, I'll loop back with you guys. Okay. So we're in Cloud 9. Cloud 9 is just like REPL, except it is hosted on your own Amazon server, which is kind of cool. So we are the only ones who have access to these resources. So I'm hoping that if I go like File, New File, and I say, hey guys, and I'm going to blow that up just a little bit more. Can you see index.js?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you share that on Zoom, please?
Oh, yeah, I see. Okay.
Sure can. Sorry. Thank you for the reminder. That and that. Okay. So we're all set up Cloud 9. That was a little bit more painful than I anticipated, but not horrible. So down here we have our terminal, just like we do on our Visual Studio Code, right? So what we're going to do is Node is already pre-installed for us here, which is awesome. If you wanted to, and you were like, I don't like Cloud 9, forget Cloud 9, you could follow along with this in Visual Studio Code, and because you already have Node installed, it will be the exact same steps. So our goal here is just to get a basic API up and running where I can go to a website and it will come back and say, hello world. So in order to get started, we need to set up our NPM project, right? We need to say, hey, we're going to be installing some of these dependencies, and we need to tell NPM to track them. So what we're going to do in our terminal is, of course, not be able to blow that up. Well, okay, that kind of works. We're going to npm init, and we're going to hit enter. You can't follow along just because I'm running the commands. Just like I'm pretty sure REPL was something similar to that. But at the end of the class, I'm going to make sure to save 30 minutes so you guys can repeat most of these steps on your own. Okay, so npm init is basically a way for it to create a file for us called package.json. Package.json tracks the basic information about the project, but it also tracks all the dependencies, all the packages that you haven't installed. So it's going to ask for basic information here. The first thing that it asks for is package name. So we'll call this basic server. And then it says what version. And whenever it has something in parentheses, that 1.0.0, it means that's what it will put in by default if you don't put anything. So if you just hit the enter button, it goes ahead and accepts that. Description, let's call it first server. Data entry point. So this is saying, okay, where do we get started out of this whole file, or out of this whole project with all these different files? Where do we jump in? Convention, just like it is on the front end, say index.html, it is the convention to call your entry point index.js. So if you wanted to change that, you could, but for right now, we're just going to hit enter and tell it that is our entry point. Test command. They want to encourage you to write use tests, test-driven development, test cases, unit tests, things like that. Well, that isn't until Jake for 5 weeks from now. So we're just going to hit enter and skip that. Git repository. Super important to spin up a Git repository. We will probably revisit that in my weeks when I come back. But right now, we're just going to skip it. We want to get up and running. Keywords, in case you want to make this searchable so other people may be able to find your package. Skip it. author, you can go ahead and type in your name there, or let's just type in CIC. License, in case you do ship this code out to other people, what license should it be under? Should it be under MIT license, or there are several different BSD and a couple other legal terms that basically they publish this license out there, and then when you publish your software, you can choose to use their license, and it gives you certain legal protection. We're not publishing this code, so we're just going to skip it. And then it's going to say, is this okay? And it's going to give us a breakdown of our package.json. We're going to hit yes. And we noticed over here, we get this new package.json file. So if we go ahead and open that up, it has basic information, right? It's all the information that we just basically entered in the terminal, except it handles all the formatting for us. Can anyone identify what format this code is written in?
JSON.
That is JSON, and it's just basic JSON. You know, we have our object at the outer edge, and then in here we have scripts, which has an object of its own that has one key and its value pair. So it's just basic JSON, and that's the great thing about JavaScript. JavaScript likes to keep things in the family, right? So Node is going to use JSON as their kind of configuration. Okay, great. We got all of that set up. We just closed the IDE. Note to self, Command W closes the whole tab, not the tab that you're in. So we have our index.js. So how do we get started? Well, we already have Node installed. AWS took care of that for us. Traditionally, you would have to install that. So there is a benefit to installing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to type in our terminal npm, and we're going to type in install, and then we're going to do this weird thing -- save. And what that's going to do is saying, instead of just installing it and forgetting about it into the ether, put that in our package.json. And then we're going to type in node, and we're going to hit enter. And it's going to run all of these crazy commands and install all these dependencies for Node. The reason why we do that, even though it's already installed, is because we want it in our package.json. And the reason why we want it in our package.json is because it also puts in the version number for us. So what it's saying is it just installed Node 12.3.1. because we didn't specify a version. So it just went out and pulled the latest one for us, which is fine.
So what you did was just do the npm in it and then give it names, so and then install it.
Yes. Okay, so now that we have it installed, we are going to write our first little Node server. And this is going to seem very verbose, and we're going to delete all of these lines of code and make a much simpler one. But it's important to know the basic Node. It is important to know that you can use Node without having to use Express, without having to use any frameworks. You can use Node straight up if you wanted to. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our const. That looks like JavaScript. And we're going to say HTTP is equal to require, which goes back to the importing module that Jake covered. And we're going to say HTTP. And HTTP is built into Node, which is why we didn't have to install it. That's just one of the core packages of Node. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop down here and we're going to say HTTP, and we're going to create a server. And it's going to say, okay, where do we want that server? What kind of data does that server take in? And what kind of data is that server going to put out? So what we're going to do is we're going to say rec for request, and res for response. It's going to say resolution, and I knew that wasn't right. Good catch. All right. Node is like, great. HTTP, we know what HTTP is, spin up a server, and I'm going to pass in some data in these parameters, in request and response, right? Okay, what would you like to do? Well, let's tell the response that there's a certain header coming back. guessing Ryan covered HTTP status codes, 200 and 400 and all that stuff. Okay, that's all in the header of the response. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, yep.
You're on package.json, right?
No, I'm on index.js.
Oh, you're on index.js. All
Is
right.
this gonna save? This stuff
Yes.
that we're writing?
Yes. But don't worry, you're going to write it all by yourself. Okay, and so we're going to say, hey, this is a 200 coming back. 200 is the universal HTTP status code for AOK. Everything's coming back great. And the person requesting the information likes to know, hey, not just the 200 AOK, but what are you sending back? What can I expect to come in here? Because if I'm sending back JSON, the browser is going to want to parse that and handle that differently than if I just send back some plain text. So what I'm going to do is I am going to say, hey, we are going to send back the content type. And the content type we are sending back is going to be text. Oops. And it's going to be plain. And this is a agreed upon format. I'm blanking on what the content type code standard is called. But there are all different kinds of content types, application/JSON, and all kinds of fun stuff. Okay, so now that we did that, we are going to write a new line. And in addition to the response saying, hey, this is coming back with the 200 and it's plain text, we're also going to write what else but hello world. Okay, and we have two more things left to do. Any guesses on what those two things are? Kind of.
Console log.
So we are putting it in res, right? We're shoving all this information into res. Now we need to tell Node that it's good to send that response. Like, we're done with it. There's no more that we're putting in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to write res.end. And we're going to say, that's it. We're done with the response. We put all the data that we want into it. It's all packaged up together. When this server is created, and we set the header, we write in our data that we want, now we're done. So when you see end, go ahead and send that off. All right. And the last thing we're going to do is we have to tell it where to listen, right? Because servers always run on ports. Servers don't just run in the ether. They don't run in your browser and are done, right? Because in the browser, it's a one-time thing. You run your JavaScript code, it's done, that's it. You go on to the next web page, it forgets about your JavaScript code. But a server is meant to be long running, right? It's meant to be able to take requests time and time again. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop down to the end here. And after this whole create server, we're going to tell that create server, hey, listen on port 8080. We'll get in, Gus will get into ports during deployment. So what we're going to do is we need to run our code, right? So we can cheat and just hit the run button here. But if you were on your computer, if you're doing local development, what we're going to do is we're going to type in node, and we are going to do node, and we're going to say index.js. With a space in between and a reminder that if you type in IND and hit tab, it's going to auto-complete that for you. So you don't have to type in the whole thing. Okay, so we're going to fire that up and we're going to get lots of errors. Yes. So what we're doing is we're writing the other side of the fetch request. We're about to fetch the code that we just wrote here. It helps if you save, just a reminder, and then rerun the code. And okay. So is this a problem?
It didn't give anything.
Just sitting there. You notice what it's not doing? It's not sitting there with another command prompt. It's just sitting there
Because it's listening, right?
because it's listening. So what we can do, and what a good practice is I'm going to hit Control-C to stop this. And you notice we get our command prompt back. What we just ran was actually working. We just didn't make a call to the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop down here and we're going to say console.log server is running. And now when we node index.js, we get a lovely error because I was already using 8080. Okay. Let's see if we can cheat on that. So what was happening is when we hit Control-C to kill off our server, Node was a pain and didn't actually kill itself. So that old version is still running. I say kill, and that may sound aggressive. That is literally the terminology that is used for how you get rid of a process, is you kill the process. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up here to show active servers. This will be less of a problem down the road, but we're going to just grab that one and kill it, and grab this one and kill it. And we're going to close this and go back in, and hopefully it will be gone. No, it's not. So we're going to force kill it.
Command K works.
Command K. That's just a clear. Oh, okay. Maybe it just took its time to clear out. So our server is running. Now we have feedback. Thank you. We have feedback that our server is running. This is great. Now let's go ahead and test it. So normally if we were on the computer, we would just go to localhost, port 8080 and see this running. On the Cloud9 environment, we can click on preview and then click on preview running application. And what do we have here? Our hello world. Okay, so what we can do is just to prove that this is working, we can say hello maps instead. Now, if we refresh this, we still get hello world. Well, why is that? That is because we didn't restart the server. So now I just hit Control-C, I hit up to rerun the last command, I hit enter to actually execute it, and now when we refresh, we still get hello world because I didn't save it. And now I just hit Command R instead of clicking on the refresh button, and we get hello maps. Okay. We just made our first Node server. Yay!
I still have hello world. I got,
Refresh the browser window.
there it is.
Perfect. Okay. And this is proof that everyone can access this, right? This is running on the internet. So I'm going to grab a URL for you guys. It's that easy, and it's about to get even easier. I'm going to figure out how to give you an IP address because we're going to need that in a second. And I'm hoping that if we go here, nope, 8080. There we go. All right, so I'm going to post this link in. This link is where our server is running. So if we bump that up, we see hello Max. So we just created a Node server, and thanks to the magic of AWS, which you guys will get into on the infrastructure side, you now have a web server running on the internet that you just created all by yourself. Yay. Okay, so we are going to do a little bit more. Then we're going to take a break. Like, guys have another like 20 minutes in you? We'll take a break. Cool. Okay. Node is awesome and everything, but I don't know about you guys, but that seems a little verbose to me, right? That seems like we're writing a lot of code. Why do I have to write that I'm sending plain text back? Why do I have to do all that? I want something easier. So the lovely people at Express came out and said, yeah, we can do easier. Sure. just like the lovely people at jQuery came out and said, you know what, I'm writing this code time and time again. I want to stop writing this. Let's create a framework. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this file. And I'm going to call it plain node. And then I'm going to create a new file called index.js. It's very, very rare to find a company that is using Node on their servers that is not using some kind of framework or another. The most common one is Express. So we are going to install Express. Someone want to guess the syntax for installing Express in the terminal?
npm install express.
Close. Can you type it and see if it shows up in the terminal? Dash save space Express. So if someone wants to run that, we should actually see it pop up in our package.json.
That added 50 packages.
That's possible. Did you run it with the -- save?
npm
yes.
install express. That's save.
npm install -- save express.
Oh, you're running it locally. That's why I didn't see it out there. But yeah, that's right. You did it right. Yep.
Do you want us to do it in the Amazon account or in
Someone else is typing. You know what? I'm going to type it just because we have a lot of people typing. What's that?
I was gonna try to use some Visual Studio, but I don't have a file.
Yeah, so you can run this right in Visual Studio. Just create an index.js file and then run your npm init.
Now, where did you want us to do it? You wanted us to do it right here in AWS?
I thought we would all try and do it together in AWS, and then for the second half of the class, you guys can attempt to do it all on your own in Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to npm install -- save, and I'm going to install Express, and I'm going to run that.
What module are we on?
Oh, sorry.
6.
It showed up in your web browser.
So when I installed it in AWS, it said added 63
so you have
packages.
That's fine. There are a lot of dependencies. Okay, so we know it was installed because it popped up in our dependency list
No.
in package.json.
Oh, no. That is that one. Yep. Can't see that. No problem.
We are going to power through, and then I promise to give you guys attention if you're stuck on the Visual Studio Code side at the second half of class.
Oh, I see it. Express.
Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back to index. And I thought I renamed you. Oh, well. I'm going to delete that. All right, so in order to get started, we're going to do something very similar to Node, except instead of requiring in HTTP, which is part of Node, instead, we are going to require in, any guesses? Express. And in order to require Express, which we called Express, we are going to say const express. So we're going to pull it into our local variables, and we are going to require Express. Now, Express is like great, but in order to use Express, you probably want an app of Express. So what we do is another layer on top of that, where we just say const app equals Express. And so what we're basically saying here is, hey, give me an instance of the Express package called app. So now we're in here. We are going to say app. And here's the magic of Express. There will be lots of different, they call them endpoints or routes that you create in Express, right? You may want to create one for getting a user and one for putting a user up there or creating a user. The endpoint, the APIs that I have built sometimes have 500 to 1,000 different endpoints and all different ways of accessing data. So Express is nice enough to build in some routing for us, which we'll get to in a second. But right now we're going to say app.get. And the reason why we're saying get is because we want it to be a get request, right? Not a post, not a put, not a patch, not a delete, just a get. And it's going to say, okay, what do you want to get? And in quotes, as a string, I'm just going to say get / get the home page, get the root URL. And then it's going to say, all right, well, what do you want to do with that? And just like Node, we are going to say rec res. And then we are going to res.send. And let's get fancy here. Let's send some JSON with a hello and a world.
In JSON, I thought
So yeah, you are right. So in JSON, this would have to be a strict quote,
yeah.
but Express is going to do some magic for us and convert what I had, which was the raw JavaScript object, into JSON for us.
And what is res doing again?
Rec is the request, so that's going to have all the incoming data, and then the res is the response. What do we want to send out there? That's it. No end, no piping, no end, and just res.send. All right. Let's go ahead and say node index.js. That's not quite what I wanted, right? But let's see. Let's go ahead and go to that URL that I sent you. And we get hello Max. Well, I wanted my JSON. Anyone have ideas on why it's doing that?
Wait, what?
So I have to tell it a port, and you have to tell it, hey, get fired up. So what's happening right now is it's running through this code, and it's going Express, pull that in from require Express. Great, I know what that is. We npm installed it. Great, we're ready to go. Oh, and you want an app, an instance of Express, something you can do with Express. Great, there's your app. Oh, and you want me to listen. If you get an API call to the root URL, do that. And all right, give you the rec and the res, and then send that hello world to you. And then it gets down to line 6, and it goes, all right, I'm done, bye. You're like, no, I want you to listen. I want you to be ready for more requests coming in. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop down here, and we are going to say app.listen, right? Listen, and it's saying, where do you want it to listen? Now, normally, and if you were running this on your computer, you would just say 8080, and you would pass in the port. But because we're opening this app up to the public internet, we want it to say, hey, don't just restrict yourself to the request coming in on the local computer, which is a security restriction by default. Instead, we want you to listen on 0.0.0.0.0, 4 zeros with dots in between. And what that's basically saying is any IP address that has a request coming in, go ahead and serve this data out. That's okay. And to be good, we are going to pass in a callback here. So basically, okay, when you listen on 8080 on any IP address, we want you to console.log server is running.
Question.
Yep.
Are you able to like just comment those 3 sections? You gave like great explanations, but just to remember some of this without having to
Sure.
read
So we're going to
all
say
of the video.
import Express and make an app instance, and then respond to a request made to the home page with JSON, and then so the reason why we want to put the console log here in line 13 is because that's only going to happen if the server successfully turns on. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop down here and we're going to say node index.js again. And we're going to get some error about it's already in use. So promise this is the last time this is going to happen. Well, I can't promise, but let's see what happens if I kill that. And well, are you thinking about it? Oh, that got deleted by accident. Save. There we go. App is equal to express. Okay. I'm gonna start it on my side. No one run that command. Okay, now we got our server running. That was just some old instances running in the background. I think it's because we're all on a collaborative environment that it's getting a little confused, but we should be good now. So let's go back to that link that I sent you and let's refresh the page. And would you look at that? We got some JSON. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, those yet undecided, we have just made our first Express app in addition to making our first Node app. Woo. All right, you want to take a break? We'll take like a 10-minute break, try and be back here at 6:55. All right, we are going to dive back in. All right, so I don't know about you guys, but I am getting sick of rebooting Node every time I save a file. This is 2019, the computer has to be smart enough to reboot our server for us. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop the server for a second, and we're going to install another package. So we are going to npm install -- save, and we are going to install this time not just Node, Nodemon, Nodemon. And it's going to install a whole bunch of things for us. And by the time it's done, I'm going to realize that I ran the wrong command. The command that I ran was for this project, right? Was npm install -- save. And that's just going to throw it in the package file for us. But we don't actually want this to install just for this project. We want it to install on the whole machine. Any guesses on what that's called? You probably won't get it unless you heard it before. That is a global install. So we are going to instead, we're going to npm install -- global Nodemon. Nodemon. And beautiful. Nodemon, all one word. Yes. That should have put it in our dependencies because we -- saved it first. Okay, and now what we're going to do is we are going to Nodemon instead of just node, we're going to Nodemon. And Nodemon is like, okay, what should I Nodemon on, right? So I'm going to say index.js. And down the road, you can set this up to watch multiple different files and reboot the server if any of them changes. But for now, night one of Node, let's not go too crazy. We are going to Nodemon index.js. And we get something very similar, right? Where it says, oh, okay. No one else run commands in the terminal just because I think multiple people are running it at the same time. And that's causing problems because we're all technically running on the same AWS server right now. You can run it locally. Yep. And you can execute all the code. You just can't start the server yourself. Okay, so we get starting node index.js, which is awesome. Servers running just like before. But notice there are some other things up here. Nodemon, the version number, and what Nodemon is watching. And watching, you guys should maybe start having some pretty bad flashbacks to SCSS and SAS. This is very similar, except it doesn't suck. Okay, so in our index.js, we're here, right? And what if we want to say, instead of hello world, what if we want to say hello world ! So I'm going to go back here. We refresh. We don't have anything. But when I hit save, why you hate me? Where's running? And it crashed again. Okay, well, this, I believe, is a Cloud9 issue, and now I can't blame any of you guys for it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look up the Nodemon documentation. I want to see if there is a timeout option to basically say, hey, when you see a change, wait like 50 milliseconds and then start it back up. So I'm going to just peruse around their documentation. And there's a delay. There is. Okay. And it is in Okay. So I'm just going to copy this code in, and let's see if this normally, and when you guys are running on your own computers, you won't have to add this command in because your computer will be fast enough to reboot it. But let's just do a delay of 1 second after we kill show active servers node, kill it. Run it on a delay. And console log hi. There we go. Okay, so what we ended up doing was instead of just node mon index.js, we said, where did we run that? We said node mon -- delay 1000 milliseconds or 1 second, and then index.js. And that basically said, hey, when you notice a file change, give it a second and then reboot. Because I'm running it, we're all sharing the server, but you will be able to execute the code and see the changes as I make it. Okay, so what that just did is that frees us up from the terminal, right? So now we don't need to constantly stop node and restart it. It's going to do it automatically for us. That's not something that we would really want to use in production. There are much better packages for making sure your node server is constantly running in production. But for local dev, it's awesome to not have to remember to continually quit it out.
I keep getting a message that says Cloud9 help, there are issues starting your app. Please make sure you're using port 8080.
That's fine. Just hit the close button and it will.
Yeah, just it keeps popping up. And then the bottom of my screen doesn't look like yours, and I keep refreshing. And I'm not in the, let's just close. Close that. And then do a new terminal. Okay.
Okay. Are we getting errors? Oh, if it's on your own computers, we'll save it for the second half. Okay. So let's dive in. Let me figure out where I want to go. Let's get Postman running first. So we're going to go to Postman. I heard through the grapevine that some people had issues getting Postman installed.
It's there though, but I just installed it outside of class.
Okay. So what we're going to do, I don't want to update right now. We're going to open up Postman. And we are going to click on new in the top left. And we're going to say request. And I'm going to call it CIC. And why won't it let me save it? That says it's optional. Save it to test collection. And we're going to save that. Okay, so now we have this interface over here on the right with our drop down of all of our different kinds of requests we can make. Yes.
So I'm not really familiar with how to use Postman. Can you
Sure.
just do that one more time? You hit the new orange button.
New and then request
Where is that?
in the top left.
Oh, wait a minute. Here it is.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah.
I have the wrong tab. Okay, the request name was.
Just CIC. And then it might make you create a folder to put it in.
Do you want?
I
me to
just called
hit-
it test.
I typed in CIC. Do you want me to hit save to test?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
It's still on the save.
Just do create collection test and then save test. There you
Yeah, they gave me the option for a folder, but it didn't demand that I make one.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so now that we're in here, we're going to go into Slack and copy that URL that we had before, the 18.2.222 IP address. And basically what this IP address is, let me see if I can blow this up more. That's how I can go. That's our AWS server. That's where our node is running, right? And so instead of a regular domain name like google.com, which is resolved through DNS, that topic's off limits for a couple weeks. So right now we're just using the raw IP address, right? So this number is basically saying, hey, go to our Cloud9 instance, go to our node server, and then this 8080 is the port that we told it right here.
Is that the number that you just showed us, is that in Slack?
It is in Slack. And so if we hit send on this, we get back our hello world. All right, so now we're set up in Postman. Now we can start doing some fun things. Now, you may ask, why do we need Postman? We have the web browser. Well, the web browser is great for GET requests, but the web browser can only make GET requests. So we could use tools like Fetch or like curl. And those are all fine ways of ingesting an API. Postman is just a nice way to test your API, especially when someone else gives you their API and you're trying to figure out how to use it, how to get the documentation working, all of that stuff. So instead of having to write code, instead you can play around in an interface like Postman, make your API calls, make sure it's all working, and then go on from there. So we have this working, and it's working over the internet, which is kind of cool, right? And everyone can run that request in Postman and get access to the server. So let's talk a little bit about routes. So we're going to create a new route. We're still going to make it a GET request. And we're going to say, hey, get/add. And in our add, we're going to add another slash, and we're going to say colon, nope, not semicolon, but a regular colon, num1. And then we're going to do another slash, and we're going to say num2. And then we're going to break out our rec and res like we normally do. And we're going to put our semicolon in. And what we just did here, this is called a route parameter, right? So we're going to pass some numbers into Express. And Express is going to do some route matching. So it's going to say, OK, I'm only going to fire off this code if you ask for /add. And I'm only going to fire off this code if you add a number / another number. Otherwise, I'm not going to match it. I don't care about this request.
Can you comment this after the route?
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, I thought you meant ROOT. Okay.
Yes. The route of the traffic, right? Okay, so now that we're in here, we need to do something. So let's just get started with a console.log. Hi. Now, this may seem silly, but we got a couple things going here that we need to test. We need to, one, make sure that our server rebooted, which it did. If you notice, there are now 2 servers is running here, which is good. The other thing that we need to test is to make sure that we can access this console log hi. This console log hi is not going to run unless Express goes, yes, I know that you want to add this and this together. So how do I do that? I don't know, but I'm going to console log something out. So we're going to go back over to Postman. And in Postman, we are going to say /add, and we're going to say /1/2. I can't pull this up anymore. I'm sorry.
Can you just point to?
I said
Oh,
/add
there.
/1/2. Okay, so I'm going to, yeah, it is. I am screen sharing on Zoom, so if it's easier to see that monitor. So I'm going to go ahead and hit send here. And I'm going to be loading. Man, it takes a long time to add 2 numbers together. Wait, we didn't even tell it to add 2 numbers together. What is it doing? Well, let's go over here. Hi. Right? Several of you ran the request, which is fine. So what's happening is it's console login, and Express is like, great, let's throw that out into the console. If someone else runs that right now, you'll notice there will be one more hi that appears in there, or it cancels it and reruns it. That's awesome. But Express is like, you didn't tell me to send anything. And you notice if we go back to Postman, Postman's like, I'm still loaded, man. It's taking forever to respond. What we want to do is tell it, hey, let's res that send, and let's send it a sum of cat. We'll get to the math in a second. Okay, so now you notice our server reboots immediately. And if we go over to Postman, Postman just gave up on that first request. They were like, oh, but if we hit send again, not only do we get our sum of cat, but if we look in our server, we have several highs because several people are hitting the server, right?
Mine sent me a message that says pain is dead.
Yeah, I think right there.
Pain is dead. Pain like window pane.
Oh, that's okay. I would just ignore that. Go to
Postman's good.
Okay.
Somebody put something.
That's really emo.
No, I think they meant like the window pane, like PANE.
PANE.
Yeah. Okay, so this is great. We have our we're sending data to the server, and the server's like, okay, now let's do something with it, right? So I'm gonna take out our console log hi, and I am going to add. If we use res to send information, what are we going to use to get the information coming in? Okay, and what we're going to do is say params. And this is a special thing that's built into Express. Express automatically takes care of these numbers for us because we put them in the root parameters. And we're going to say num1, and we are going to add rec.params.num2. Okay, and we're going to restart the server really quick because Cloud9 hates me. Okay, so now that we're in here, and this should look like basic JavaScript, right? Maybe the res are new, maybe the number of curly braces are new, but for the most part, this is just basic JavaScript, right? So we're going to come over here. No, we're not. We're going to open up Postman, and we are going to send our GET request again. And we got our sum of 12. Well, not quite, right? So what happened there? It concatenated. So how do we fix concatenation? Because this information is coming in as a string. How do we know other than the fact that it just concatenated?
The dollar sign thing?
Not quite. That would be to go in reverse. If you had a number and wanted to put it in a string, you could do the $ thing. So just to prove that this is a problem, what we're going to do is we're just going to console.log type of rec.params.num1. And when we save that, and Cloud9 hates me, I promise you won't have these problems locally. Okay, and when we go to Postman and run that code again, we see that the type of num1 is a string in our console. So anyone remember how we deal with strings that are numbers that we want to actually be numbers? Stringify, but in reverse. Parse int. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap this in a parse int. And we are going to parse int the second one as well, right? Because we want them both as numbers.
Isn't there a way you can just make it like a sign, an integer equals?
So even if you put it in another variable, I think what you're saying is something like const num1 is equal to rec.params.num1.
Like I would just do that in my space.
So you could do this, but what this is going to do is it will still be a string, even though we put it in num1 and num2, because express is passing in a string. It will continue to be a string.
Isn't that, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Okay. Is like, what if you put it like integer float? Is there like things like that in JavaScript or in Node.js?
So
Data type.
Yeah.
So JavaScript is not a strong typed language. It is a dynamically typed language. So whatever data you put into the variable is the type that variable is going to be. And if you, for some reason, change the type of that variable and put it back into the variable will change to the new type of the data. And there are pros and cons to both strong typed and dynamically typed languages, but JavaScript is a dynamically typed language, which is why we don't do something like integer here, right? Like that would, JavaScript would just be like, what do you mean? I know it's an integer, you're passing it in. All right, so I'm going to take this out for now, and we're going to save. I'm going to go back to the old school way of starting up the server. No, it's doing it there too. It's like it. I wonder if, give me 1 second. I'm going to look in the. I'm wondering if Cloud9 is trying to run the server for us. Let's just try and do it their way instead. So I'm going to just hit the run button. And pain is dead.
Just ahead of my time.
Server is running. Okay, let's try this. All right, so we're going to go back to Postman. We're going to run our request, and we get our sum of a lovely 3. And notice that 3 is not in quotes. So that means it got the number back. Congratulations, you just sent your first data to the server. You sent that number 1 and that number 2, and you guys can try this all on your own computer, change either the first number or the second number, send it over. Please send only numbers right now. We're not at air checking quite yet. And you should see the sum come back. Cool. Okay. So one way of sending data to your server is a root parameter. And that makes sense when traditionally use root parameters for smaller pieces of data, like ID numbers of a user or of a certain record in your database. It's normally for like a higher order thing. But sometimes you may want to send a get parameter to your website, right? Anyone know what a get parameter looks like? You've seen it a gazillion times on almost every website you've been to. So
The question mark?
Question mark, exactly. So what we're going to do here is instead of saying add/1/2 and express figuring out what num1 and what num2 is, instead what we're going to do is we're going to say add. And I'm just going to comment out this code before I forget about it. Okay, so what we're going to do in Postman is we're going to get Postman set up. And this is kind of test-driven development a little bit. We're going to set up what we want to work, and then we're going to go make it work, right? So we're going to say we're still going to add, and we're going to add a question mark. So that question mark is going to tell Express, hey, I'm going to send in some additional data here. You don't have to worry about it. And I'm going to send in num1, and num1 is equal to 5. And notice that Postman did something nice for us. They set up this table for us, and they were like, look, man, if you don't want to type out those query parameters, you don't have to. You can just do it in the interface. But we're going to be fancy because we're noobs. We're going to do an ampersand, and an ampersand is what's going to tell, is a delimiter, right? It's going to tell the computer, hey, another parameter is coming. And then we're going to say num2 is equal to 3. Okay? this isn't going to work because when we send it, Cloud9 is, or Express is like, I don't know what this is. You commented it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop down here and we're going to say app.get. And we're going to do an add again. But this time, because we already defined the variable names on the request side, right? We said num1 and num2. We don't need to define it in the root. We don't need to tell Express to, that data is coming in. We just use it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our request and our res like normal. And we are going to res.send like normal, and we'll send our sum again. But in our sum, this time, we are going to do rec.query.num1 plus rec.query.num2. And we will save that. And I think Cloud9 is not fighting me. Well, let's see. What happens if I run that? No, Cloud9 hates me too. All right, what we're going to do is we're going to do a quick reboot of our server, which will kick you guys out for 1 second, but just give it a minute and it will reconnect. I'm hoping that when we reboot the server, it won't throw a hissy fit every time I change the code. Okay, and we're going to go back to here. Okay. Now we're up. We got our code back. Let's hit the run button. Just hit the refresh button in the browser in Chrome. Just give it a second. And then see if you just hit the or hit OK on that, and you should be back. One more time. And one more. Okay, now just open the files over on the left. Okay, we should be back now. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go to Postman, and I'm going to send. And we get our sum of 53 again. All right. Well, now we're reminded that query parameters also come in as strings. So we are going to parse that int. And we are going to parse this int. I'll throw that on a new line, and we're going to save. And we're going to see if. OK, we got our sum of 8. So now we just move that into a query parameter. Now there's one more way of sending data into the server. One of them is right on the URL. One of them is as a root parameter. One of them is a get parameter, right, which we're going to send in with the get parameter names. Anyone think of a third? Say it louder. It is similar to a put request. So there are all kinds of different requests, right? They're get, they're post, they're put, they're delete, they're patch. But almost all of them except get have this thing called a body argument. So instead of just sending it in the URL or sending it in the get parameter, we can send it into the body. Now the body is normally communicated using what syntax, what language? JSON. The response of a lot of web requests, especially GET requests, tend to be HTML because every web page you load is just a regular GET request. But the way we are going to send our data into our API is using JSON. Now, lots of different ways you can do it. You can do it with something called form encoding, which is also another very common method because the browser, whenever you see like a contact us form page on your website, it can use form encoding to upload that information to your API. But because we're JavaScript fanatics, we're going to use not only JSON to send data into our API, but JSON to get that data back, right? Which is what we're already doing. That sum 8, we're sending the JSON back. So in order to tell Express, we are going to be pulling in some JSON. We are going to introduce one new concept and one that you're going to love to hate. The first concept is called a middleware. And the middleware, what it's going to do is the Express is going to come into your server. And Node is going to go, oh, I'm running Express. That's great. And Node's going to get it, and it's going to dump it into Express, and Express is going to go to run the code. And before it even matches on any routes, it's going to say, hey, do I have any middleware? Is there anything in the middle between me fulfilling my actual request that I need to run? And basically what that's going to do is it's going to process some of your code and then hand it off to your endpoint, your handler, as they call it. And your handler is going to run that code. So what we're going to do, let's set us up to fail again and then install and then get the thing working. So we're going to go to body this time. And I'm going to delete out these parameters. And I'm going to go into my code and I'm going to comment this out again. And this time, I'm going to go to body in Postman. And right underneath body, it's going to have a bunch of these different things. Are you sending in form data? Are you sending in, is it encoded? Is it binary? What are you sending in? And what we're going to do is we're going to pick raw here. And it's going to go, OK, raw, you just want an open text field. That's fine. But notice we get this new dropdown that says text. We're going to change that text to JSON. OK.
So you can type it in as just plain text or
if you want to, because at the end of the day, Postman doesn't care what kind of data you're sending. But if you don't send it in a way that Express is going to expect it, Express is just going to be, I don't know what that is. That just looks like a string. I don't know how to handle that. So what we're doing is by setting it to JSON here, we're telling Express, hey, we're sending you up some JSON, and here's the JSON. And then Express is going to go, oh, I know how to handle JSON. It will. So we're going to write out some JSON here. So we are going to write a curly brace, and we're going to say num1. And it's important to get the quotes around it because we are in actual JSON here. This isn't JavaScript objects. This is actual JSON. And our number is going to be 4, and our num2 is going to be 3. Now, one major benefit of using JSON or using the body is, look, I didn't put these in quotes because JSON has different types for numbers. So when Express gets this information, we're not going to have to parse out the int because we are sending in integers. We're sending in numbers. We don't have to say, oh, hey, everything coming in is a string. Try and get it out of there. OK? So we have our num1. We have our num2. If we send this, we get null. And why is that? Well, that's because over here, we still have our app. So we're going to app.get. We're going to do a new add. We're going to do our rec and res like always. OK, we are going to res.send. And what are we going to send? We are going to send our sum. And this time, we are going to do our rec.body, right? So we had params, we had query, And now we have body, and we're going to say num1 plus rec.body.num2. And we're going to save that. And we're going to come over to Postman, which I'm going to finally move to this window so I don't forget about it. Come on. Okay. And I'm going to run it, and we get an error. Cannot read property num of undefined. Okay. Now, if we go back to our Cloud 9 instance, we see this lovely stack trace. Cannot read num1 of undefined. What it's basically saying is, I can't read num1 of body. Body isn't there. How do we get body? Well, body isn't by default built into Express. It's like, I know query. Query I got, right? Params, I got params. That I got. Body, I don't know. So what do you think we do to make Express understand body?
Don't you have to create and set it with actor?
We add a package. So I am going to go to my terminal, and I am going to say npm install --save. If you wonder how I have this memorized, it's because this is what I do all day, every day, is just install packages. And we're going to install a package called body-parser. Okay, and it's going to run. It's going to get a bunch of dependencies. We have it installed. We can check to make sure it's installed, because if we go to our package.json, we see that we have body parser installed as a dependency. And and what we're going to do is go back to our index.js, and all the way up at the top, we have our Express required. We have our app set up using Express. Now what we're going to do, Now what we're going to do is say const body parser is equal to require body-parser. And what's important here is this code, the body-parser, is the exact node name. Now we can call it whatever we want in our variable here, right? We could call this body parser all lowercase if we wanted. What's important is that this name matches what the npm package is that we just installed. Okay, now we are going to app.use. So we had get. We're going to get into posts and a couple other app dot things. We have an app.listen down at the bottom. Those are all things that are built into Express. So now we're going to app.use, and it's going to say, okay, well, what do we want to use? We want to use body parser. Well, what part of body parser do we want to use? The JSON part. Not here, because we get to name it whatever we want on the left side. Okay, so now you may say, Max, how do you know all of these things? Well, we can go to this lovely website called npm.js. And one of my favorite things about this website is every time you refresh it, they tell you a different acronym that NPM stands for. So right now it's new power management. And if you go to another page like body-parser, you will get non-deterministic palindrome machine. Trust me, you can spend a lot of times and not get any repeats. Okay, so we're going to pop open body parser here. And it's going to say that it's a body parsing middleware available under rec.body. And if we scroll down a little bit, we will have the npm install that we just ran, the require that we just put in, and it will show you bodyparser.json and the options that go with it. And if we're lucky, no, they aren't going to give us an example. Sometimes they even give us an example. So all this documentation is here if you need to get into the nitty-gritties and figure out like, hey, I want to put a limit on how many, on the size the JSON can be uploaded, or I need to make sure that only this kind of JSON is uploaded. You could do that all in this parser. So when we go back to our Cloud9 interface, what we just said is, hey, anytime something comes in, we just set up a middleware in Express. This is a middleware. So what it's saying is, before it gets to our endpoint, run it through bodyparser.json. And bodyparser.json is going to go, oh, look, you uploaded some JSON. I'll give you a body object. And now, because we handled that, because we told Express to do that, we have access to our rec.body. So I'm going to drop down here. I'm going to make sure. Well, let's see what happens. So we have our rec.body. We're adding the numbers together. Let's run it. And we still get the same error. So I'm going to restart the server by just clicking run and seeing if Cloud9 wants to do that better than running it locally. And we're going to hit send, and we get our sum of 7. All right, I got 2 more things for you guys, and then you're going to do it all by yourselves. Okay.
Ask you a quick question though.
Yes.
Is this just a matter of personal preference, or are there benefits?
There are benefits.
Is that what you're gonna talk about?
Things like, so when you have a lot of data, you'll tend to want to put it in a body. There are GET requests just can't have body elements to them. So you need to either use a different kind of method like a post or a put, or put them all in the query parameters. When we get more into real user data and interacting with the database, we'll start to see more like a GET, right? You're just retrieving the information. So you typically don't need to send a lot of information because you're receiving a lot of it, which is why a GET normally doesn't need a body. For something like a post or a put, where you're either creating something new or updating something that already exists, the traditional way of doing it is putting the ID of what you're updating in the URL, and then putting all the data that you're updating in the body. So basically, how do I find the data that I'm updating? And then here's all the information that I want to update. But we'll dive into that more on week 2. I'm actually a little concerned about week 1 of this because I'm like burning through content here. I'm going to watch your guys' capstones tonight, and then start to kind of regroup on what week 1 means of Node without JavaScript. I definitely want to do like a whole project where you guys are on your own and got a server up and running. But I am a little concerned. I can fill week 2 and 3 fine because I got databases and I can talk about frameworks, and we can actually make an app that's standing all on its own using those frameworks, which is really cool. But I'm now like, okay, Monday's done, got 3 more days. So we'll definitely find things to fill it with, and it will be good for you guys to kind of catch your breath a little bit, catch up on Node. And then maybe like Thursday, we'll do a catch-up day where like any questions you have from any of the previous modules we can do. But that's all TBD. I got 2 more topics for tonight. Okay, so what we're going to do, we are going to make our own middleware, and we are going to server static file. That was it. Okay, so let's make our own middleware. So let's look at, we're going to comment this code back out. Oh, you know what? While we're here, we're going to copy this whole thing. Oh, you know what's interesting? We just broke a rule.
Usually it's much more fun than this.
GET requests are not supposed to have bodies on them.
Thinking that.
So in some other server-side languages, it would yell at you and it would just be like, no, you can't do that. Express apparently doesn't care. What we should have done is change this GET to a post. And if we save that and jump back over to here and run it, where's it getting that from? Let's rerun it here. And run it. we get an error, right? It says it can't get add, and it's because we told the Express server that it's no longer a get, it is now a post. So when we tell Postman, hey, go do a post request to that instead, when we send it, we'll get our number back. We did break a rule on that though. So you just learned how to do a post request. 3 things. Okay, now back down to 2. All right, so what we're gonna do, we're gonna make our own middleware. And we know that we constantly add numbers, right? But when we look at this code here, that seems kind of sloppy because we're parsing it in, we're parsing it in. What if we have 50 different functions that are expecting numbers coming in, right? We just want to automatically handle parsing them. So we're going to make our own middleware. Our own middleware is just a function, and it's a function with not 2, but 3 special parameters. So because it's Express, we're going to say const number parser, and we are going to pass in 3 parameters. Any guesses on what the first 2 are? Rec and res. And we're going to do a 3rd one this time, and this one is called next. And basically, instead of sending it like we do at the end of a normal request, we're going to call next instead, because middlewares are chains of functions, right? You're always calling the next one until you get to the very end, and then you send it out. So we are going to have our function here. And what we're going to say is rec dot, let's do it on the query params, dot num1 is equal to parse int of rec.query.num1. And rec.query.num2 is equal to parse int of shocker rec.query.num2. Okay? And now we need to tell it to use that function that we just defined. So in here, instead of saying, okay, our root is add, and then here's our handler, here's our endpoint that we're going to run, we're going to tell it, hey, go run number parser. And then we're going to take out our parse ints here. And when we save that, and we run that, we get sum 7. And we know it's still running because we can change our num to 2 and we get 5. So what we basically just did is we said, hey, go execute this code up here. If you get an add request coming in, before you run this code, go run this code first, handle some data, and then go run the next one. Although I did forget a step, and now I'm wondering if the server wasn't running. I'm going to comment that out and see what happens, because I believe the server didn't reboot, which is really bothering me. No, it did. Normally, you would call next in a middleware. And the reason why you want to call next is because you want to tell it, hey, I'm done with this. Now move on to the next step. So apparently it isn't always required, but it is very good practice to put next in there to basically say, I'm done with this. Let's move on to the next function. So you could actually chain middlewares in here if you wanted to. Now you may say, why would I do this? Why wouldn't I just write all that code in one function? You could. Middlewares are very helpful for authorization and authentication. So we're going to get to that stuff a couple weeks from now. But what we're basically just doing is passing in another function to run before we run our main handler. Yeah.
You said that you needed const.
I was thinking that too.
Yeah, why is that?
Right here. You could use let, you could use var. Const is the most correct answer of the 3 of them. And the reason for that is const is a constant. It's defined, so it's not going to change. So after we set it to this equal, that equal never changes. Number parse never changes its value. We would use a let if we said, oh, down the road, you know what, I want number parser to do this now instead. Then you would use a let. Var is the most dated of the 3 of them. Var came before let and const, where there was no version of const. and it wasn't scoped, it wasn't,
Right.
and so that's why if you see code using var, you should change it to let and const.
Okay.
Just be smart about which one you want to use.
But that's just general, it's not because you want Express, that was the impression.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Okay, we're gonna do one more thing, and then you guys are gonna spin up your own Express servers and take some parameters and add them together. And then you get to leave. Okay? So the one more thing we're gonna focus on is before I go into the curriculum and realize that I've forgotten everything, but I have 3 more days, is we're gonna serve a file, right? So JSON is great, some plain text is great, but a web server you think would be able to serve a web page, right? So let's go ahead and set that up. So we're gonna create a new folder in our CIC. Just follow along with this because we're all sharing the same area, and we're gonna call it public. And public is a very common naming convention to say, hey, anything in this folder is going to be accessible by the internet. And then we're going to drop down to the bottom here before our app.listen, and we are going to say app.get, and let's call it index.html. And what are we going to do? Shocker, we're going to res it. And we are going to res.send file. And what we're going to do here is because Node is running on the server, because it's running on your file system, it can get confused. And it's like, whoa, do you mean the root of the hard drive? Do you mean your home folder? Do you mean your desktop? I don't really know where you're talking about. And so Node provides us, not Express, but Node itself provides us this lovely little thing with a double underscore and dir name. And it will actually tell you the name of the directory that you're currently executing in. And we're going to add something to that. And what are we going to add? We're going to add index.html. Okay, well, that's great, but we don't have an index.html. So we're going to go into our public folder. I think this is actually not going to work, but we're going to power through anyway. And we're going to create a new file called index.html. And we're going to open up our HTML. And I know you guys are going to be shocked by this, but we're going to put hello world. We're going to run our server. Cloud9 is going to hate me and not run my server, but I want it to run anyway. Okay, so no, actually it's saying public index.html. There is no such what you're talking about, Willis? Let's go back to our code, index.html. It's in public. Let's save it and run it again. Now it wants to run fine. Okay. Maybe I forgot to save it. Let's say I forgot to save it. Okay. So we're going to go back to, we don't have to go to Postman. We could do this in Postman if we wanted to, but I'm just going to go back to our regular web browser. And I'm going to go to my URL and I'm going to go to index.html. And what it's going to say is you need, which is a very common error, no such file or directory. It can't find it. So if we go back here, well, here's why it can't find it. It's looking in index.html. So what we wanted to look in is public index.html. So let's save that. Let's run it again. Let's go back to, go away, Zoom. Go away. No, my tab's back there. Oh, there we go. And let's refresh, and we get our hello world. And now that hello world's on the internet. So anyone who types in that URL can go to index.html and see our website. And the kind of cool thing is because we are still running.
Control or Command Option Arrow.
Oh, okay.
I still have the JSON.
I'll be right over because we're almost done. Static. Yep, this is it. I completely forgot what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Oh well.
So.
You know what? It's running on my computer, so it should be running on yours as well. So if you go ahead and refresh /index.html, right? Because we told it, hey, only much better. Just the refresh button will reload it. There you go.
There we go.
Okay. So I have bombarded you with all of my node information. That is it. Now everyone should go install Express on their computers and create an API that can add two numbers together. Go. I'm going to leave this file as it is. I'm going to add some comments into it just so you guys know what's happening. The commented out code is a fine version to use. You can use query parameters, you can use body parameters, you can use root parameters, you can do whatever you want. The homework assignment for tomorrow is just to add two numbers together. So if you would like to do it now in the next 30 minutes, you can. If you'd like to go home 30 minutes early and just submit it in Google Classroom as soon as I create the assignment, you can also do that. Okay, so NodeMon you need to install at the global level. And this is a good note for everyone. If you're trying to install NodeMon, NodeMon has to be installed at the global level on your computer, not just in the package. And when you do that in your terminal on your computer, it's going to give you all kinds of errors. And that's because your project doesn't have access to your whole computer. So you need to use a very super selective command that you should only use when instructed. That is sudo, S-U-D-O, space, and then npm install -- global NodeMon.
Oh, is that for like all those errors you've been getting? Oh,
So you're going to do sudo,
just do sudo first.
S-U-D-O. It stands for super user do, which is super weird, but that's just like
Super easy.
install. Yep.
Super easy.
No, you're right. npm install -- global space NodeMon, NodeMon. And now that's your, when it prompts you for a password, when you use sudo, that is your max password. That's where you like sign in, you turn on the computer.
So SUDO.
Okay, you're in.
Okay, so now I can actually say the time.
Correct.
Oh, that was so annoying. That's what I was gonna ask you, like why.
I'm sorry, totally my bad. Should have told you that.
It's okay. I was just like, what is happening?
Yep, that's gonna blow it up nice and good.
And
That actually won't run. You provide
really?
npm after sudo.
what else was I
NPM
supposed to
after sudo, okay.
Control C to get out of that. And when you type in your password in sudo, by the way, the characters don't show up. That's a normal security feature. Welcome to the 1970s when sudo was invented. Quite literally.
All right, so sudo install -- global.
Very good.
Sudo npm install -- global.
Okay, so when you use delay and you put it in that on 2500.
You don't have to do that on your local computer. Cloud9 is just fighting me tooth and nail. I don't know if I'm going to use that tomorrow or not. It's also tough to do collaborative coding when you're teaching the things. Like, how are you supposed to get someone to type res.send when
You haven't taught it.
you haven't taught send? So I'm wondering if that will be better down the road. for things. Or if we do like a group project together, like, okay, great, now you guys know all of it, let's go build an API together.
We should do that.
Yes.
Is our homework to add the two numbers? Add any two numbers you want? Like that? Or do you want some different?
Yep, no, that's fine, as long as it's running
And it's
locally. Yes,
Yeah, this is on my, so like if I change this, that would be nice.
well, you're hitting my server, 2018.222.
Yeah, so wait.
That needs to be localhost.
Oh,
So if you look at Postman, up at the top right now, it says HTTP 18.2.222. Whatever, that IP address is the server. That's my code that's running.
oh.
So as soon as I turn off that server, your two numbers aren't going to add together. So what you're going to do is instead of that 18.2.222 IP address, you're going to do 127.0.0.1. And that stands for localhost. That's your local computer. So instead of going out on the internet, that IP address is a special number where your computer goes, oh, no, I'm not even going to leave myself. It's actually called a loop back. I'm going to loop back to myself to run the code.
But
After you get it in there and get another function, install this, can I do that?
No, that's just a newer version of it. Yeah.
Okay, so good, now I can just go there.
Yep, you can, yep.
It worked fine.
Question?
yeah, I'm kind of confused.
I haven't seen anything too long. Okay.
Where does this go?
Yeah, so,
Because I tried that and then all of a sudden my site went to quit, so.
yeah, so what you would basically be saying is anything that's in this field, you're limiting your Express server to only listen to that IP address. So what you can do is by default, it will actually work without it because by default, it will only use your local host. Or if you wanted to, you could leave this in here as 0.0.0.
That's what I have it as, and then I thought I was supposed to change it, and you said 127.
And the 0.0 is like any IP address, just take any one.
Okay.
Or you could take it out because by default, it will work on localhost. Because you're not running a web server, because the internet isn't trying to like attack your computer.
So.
Well, the router will actually protect you from that because it's doing, it's almost like I went to the iSchool and forgot all of it. It's gonna come to me in the middle of tonight. It does a process where it takes your public IP address, so what Comcast or what Xfinity or Fios or whoever gives you, and splits it into several different IP addresses, right? So if you look at your computer, the IP address is going to be 192.168.1.101. Someone else is going to be 102, all of that, but they're all sharing the same public IP address.
Interesting.
And that is what's preventing your computer from just like serving this out on the internet to everyone.
That traversal.
Now, thank you. Network address translation. So
Okay.
it's doing the translation, and what the router is doing is taking all the ports, right, and being like, okay, well, you get these 100 ports, and whenever these 100 ports get requested on the public IP address, that means that you actually are requesting this port on your computer on the IP address that I assigned to you, and that works both ways.
Interesting.
Sorry, super in depth.
No, that's great.
Okay. What's that?
Yes.
I'm just trying to figure out what I didn't actually.
So go to Postman. And,
This is still yours.
okay, so change
So
the
I was watching, I couldn't.
from,
Sure.
yep, slash.
So I know he says NPM and then. And then.
Okay, so now
I'm
you
trying
can't
to
get any response. So let's go back to Visual
do the
Studio
whole
Code.
same thing and it kept saying.
And it doesn't look like you're running your
Name can
server.
only contain.
So you can
Oh,
run
because
that.
I just installed.
Okay.
Wait, so,
INIT.
huh?
So you just
And then
installed it, so it's
NPM.
not the server. So now you need to start the server back up.
Oh, before you do
Am I
that,
starting over now?
you gotta tap through all the, it's trying to init your package again.
So it's just asking for your package name down there.
Like that.
Yep, and now go back.
Right at the bottom line there.
Save it at the dependency in the package.
Nope, even down under that. So see where it says
In front of.
press C at any time to quit.
Uh-huh.
So you typed npm
Oh.
edit, so it's trying to make you create a new package now.
Oh, okay, so what am I gonna do?
Well,
That
that's not what I wanted, right?
The JSON package, that whole thing?
Yeah, so when you, you can give it a name if you want, or you can leave it its default.
Add.
Oh, so just,
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Oh.
Another.
Colon.
Just type a different name.
Oh, okay.
See, it's got those, the colons down there, it doesn't have those colons.
And now, so I'm missing part of it.
JSON?
Uh,
Or just name?
It is. So this is just the package name. This is what will be put inside your package.json. This can be whatever you want it to be. In this case, because we're creating an API, you can just call it my API or something. Sure.
No, but
Version,
you're
you can
doing
just
it.
tap
at
through
the
that.
bottom.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter.
Description.
Um,
Yeah, so this part you just kind of like hit enter through because
3 point. Yes. That's the man.
Can you install my parser?
Sorry, keyword.
Oh, no, that's the other thing that I couldn't get to install. Okay, so I gotta do
Yeah.
sudo.
I'm gonna post a link in Slack,
So now you get your package.
which is instead of
So now it's when you can do
So essentially, so now because now my computer's acting as the server.
exactly.
Okay, so,
Yep.
and
Express.
body parser
Mhm.
is,
There you go. Out from the bottom. Yep. So in this case, you want to do sudo first. Then when you do a global install, you'll need the super user permissions to install it.
I gotta do sudo.
Yeah.
npm.
Look at your dash G. Yeah. So that's like a shorthand for global. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Who wants help next?
And installing body
Oh, yeah, your Mac
parser
password.
is the same as when we did the other one, right?
Yes, it's the same as Express.
And it has a dash between it,
Yes.
right? Install global. Two dashes before global, but body dash parser.
It's.
These
fine.
are all
Yeah.
warnings.
Yeah.
So the best way to test is just do node on enter, and as soon as it runs commands, instead of throwing an error at you.
So we're doing sudo npm install dash dash body dash parser.
Well, dash dash global,
It's okay.
Okay.
then body dash.
So you want to do require express
The
essentially.
global is because you want it on
So
your
constant
computer,
app
not just a package in the
equals
folder, in
require.
the project area,
That's correct.
correct?
Yes.
And then in parentheses express.
So Express is what
Then
we use
have
to
to
put
run-
to set up a.
Then I have to run
Server?
node
Yep.
on again,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So remember he did like
Yes.
require HTTP at the beginning, he did like a
Yeah.
create server.
That's what I was
So
thinking.
Express takes all that and puts it into a easier to write framework. So you don't have to really remember create server, you just write app.get, I think, for example.
Go back to your code. Oh, actually, go back to Postman for 1 second. No, that's right.
Oh, cool.
Okay. So that's a get, not an add. I'm sorry, that's a get, not a post.
Oh, no, now we have,
So try that.
in here we have red and correct,
Yeah.
Yep.
and then
Body parser was last.
arrow.
Okay.
and then one of these.
Yep, perfect.
There we go. Cool. Do you want me to
Done, get
screenshot it?
That's fine. Actually, yeah, it will be good. I will create
here
the
we have
Google Classroom assignment right
Different
now,
ways
Okay.
to.
because I'm trying to be better about
query.
following students' progress.
It's okay.
So we had the query,
But I
which
still
is
have
like the one after
some
the
of the
question mark.
assignments from your
There's
class
also the
before,
path
so-
parameters where you do like.
Hold on, I just need to end